There is a man named Marcus who, in the summer of 2023, solved three of the most expensive problems in modern life for under $5. He was living outside in Atlanta, 95 degrees for 11 consecutive days, humidity so thick and close it felt less like weather and more like a physical presence. In those conditions, he built a shelter that was 20 degrees cooler than the ambient air outside it. He collected and purified his own drinking water without a filter, a pump, or a purchase. He stayed dry through Georgia thunderstorms that would have soaked through a standard tent in 20 minutes. His materials: a $3 tarp, 30 feet of cord pulled from a dumpster, clear plastic bottles, a piece of concrete found on the ground. That is not a survival story in the dramatic sense. That is a physics lesson. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly how every part of that system worked and why the principles behind it were never included in anything you were formally taught. Let's start with where Marcus chose to build, because the site selection was as important as the materials. He walked 3 blocks of abandoned lots before he settled on a particular gap between 2 scrub oaks behind a shuttered warehouse. When you look at what he was evaluating, it reads less like desperation and more like a site assessment. He needed ground that was slightly elevated relative to its surroundings, so rain runoff would move away from him rather than toward him. He needed a tree canopy overhead, not for romance, but because canopy breaks direct solar radiation without sealing out airflow. He needed firm, dry soil that would hold a stake. He walked the site at midday to check shadow patterns. He pressed his palm to the ground to check subsurface moisture. These are the same variables a civil engineer evaluates when siting a structure. The difference is, Marcus was doing it for free with his feet and his hands, in an afternoon. What he built at that site was simple and purposeful. 2 tarps were suspended, one above the other, with a 12-inch gap of open air between them. The floor was excavated 8 inches below ground level. He used 3 layers of corrugated cardboard as insulation, with a moving blanket on top. 3 clear 2-liter bottles were angled toward the afternoon sun on a flat piece of scavenged concrete. We will come back to each of these elements in detail, because each one is solving a specific, identifiable problem, and understanding the problem is what makes the solution stick. The first problem is dryness, and it is more complicated than it appears. Most people's mental model of a waterproof shelter is simple. Put something impermeable over your head and stay dry. For light rain at the right angle, that model works, but real weather is not cooperative, and real shelter failure is almost never the result of rain punching straight through a tarp. It happens 2 other ways. The first is pooling. A tarp pitched at a shallow angle holds water rather than sheds it. That water finds the low point, and the low point is usually directly above where you are sleeping. The second and less intuitive failure mode is condensation. Your body produces heat and moisture continuously throughout the night. In a low ventilation shelter, that moisture rises, contacts the cooler inner surface of the tarp, and returns to you as liquid. People who shelter under tarps regularly wake up soaked, not from rain coming in, but from their own exhaled breath coming back down. They conclude that tarps simply do not work. What actually failed was the geometry. Marcus pitched his tarp in what bushcraft practitioners call the plow point configuration. One end of his ridgeline was tied high, about 5 feet between the 2 oaks. The tarp draped over the center of that line, creating a peak. The 2 front corners were staked wide and low, at least 8 feet out from the ridgeline, producing a steep triangular face angled past 30 degrees. Rain hitting that surface moved fast, too fast to pool or slow. At each stake corner, he tied a small overhand knot in the fabric, an inch from where the tie-out cord met the tarp. It is a technique with a simple name, drip line, and a simple function. It interrupts the surface tension of water moving along the cord, stopping it from wicking backward into the shelter interior. One small knot, one free adjustment, an entire category of leak eliminated. The rear edge of the tarp was not pegged flat to the ground. It was raised 4 to 6 inches on each side, held up with sticks, leaving a continuous gap running the length of the shelter. That gap is the answer to condensation. When warm, moist interior air has an exit, it takes it. It moves through rather than accumulating. The shelter breathes, and a breathing shelter does not condense moisture back onto the person inside it. Ground choice, pitch angle, drip lines, a raised rear edge, 4 adjustments. None of them cost anything. The cooling system is where the physics becomes genuinely surprising. Here is something most people who have sheltered under a tarp in summer do not realize. A single-layer tarp in direct sun does not provide cooling. It provides amplification. Polyethylene absorbs solar radiation and re-radiates it downward. The sealed airspace beneath the tarp heats faster than the open air outside it. It is the same physics that makes a parked car in July dangerous. A standard single-layer tarp lean-to on a 95-degree afternoon can run several degrees hotter inside than out. Marcus solved this with a principle that nomadic cultures across North Africa and the Arabian Peninsula had independently developed across thousands of years. 2 roofs separated by an air gap. His silver tarp, the reflective one he had found, went on top, reflective side facing up. A silver polyethylene surface in good condition reflects roughly 90% of incoming solar radiation, bouncing the sun's energy back into the sky before it enters the thermal system below. 12 inches beneath it, the blue top formed the actual ceiling of the living space. The gap between them is not decorative. It functions as a chimney. What little heat manages to pass the reflective barrier enters that channel, rises toward the peak, and exits with the breeze before reaching the space below. The living area is isolated from the sun's thermal load by a dedicated zone whose only job is to collect and expel heat. The dig down completed the system. At 8 inches below the surface, the ground holds its temperature at something close to the regional annual average, not the daily or seasonal high. In Atlanta in July, surface soil was baking past 90 degrees. 8 inches down, the earth was running in the mid-60s. That temperature differential was working in Marcus's favor, passively and continuously, at no cost. Cardboard between body and earth provided insulation from the cold side. The moving blanket above provided cushion and a vapor barrier. The cumulative effect was a sleeping environment running 20 degrees cooler than the outdoor air. 20 degrees below 95 is 75. That is the difference between heat stress and genuine rest. In physiological terms, it is the difference between a body that is fighting its environment all night and a body that is recovering. The water system is where the numbers become almost difficult to believe if you have never worked them out. Rainwater collection scales with catchment area, and the math is simple. 1 inch of rainfall over 1 square foot of catchment yields roughly half a gallon of water. An 8 by 10 foot tarp gives you 80 square feet of catchment. 1 inch of rain over that surface produces approximately 40 to 45 gallons, accounting for edge loss and surface evaporation. A person's minimum daily water requirement for drinking, basic cooking, and hygiene is around 3 gallons. One moderate thunderstorm over Marcus's tarp was producing a 2-week water supply. The collection mechanism required no purchase and no installation. The plow point pitch concentrated runoff toward the 2 low front corners. Marcus gathered the fabric at the lowest corner and tied it off with a short cord, directing flow into the open mouth of a 2-gallon milk jug sitting on the ground beneath it. Gravity did the entire job. The container was positioned at the point where the water was already going. Collected rainwater is not immediately safe to drink. It carries whatever settled on the tarp surface, dust, particulates, and organic material from urban air. Marcus pre-filtered visibly cloudy water through a folded cloth, then treated it using a method the World Health Organization recognizes as a valid household water treatment approach in resource-limited settings, called SODIS. The process is this: fill a clear PET plastic bottle, the kind most beverages come in, with the collected water. Lay the bottle flat on a reflective surface. Leave it in direct, unobstructed sunlight for 6 hours minimum, or 2 consecutive days if the sky is more than 50% overcast. Ultraviolet radiation penetrates clear, PET, and disrupts the DNA replication of bacteria and most waterborne pathogens. They do not die dramatically, they simply lose the ability to reproduce. The water is biologically safe by the criteria of every public health organization that has evaluated the method in controlled study. Marcus ran 3 bottles in rotation on the flat concrete surface, a surface chosen specifically because it reflected additional ultraviolet upward through the bottle's underside, increasing treatment efficiency. He was never without a supply of treated water for more than a single day. It is worth pausing here to ask why none of these techniques appear in standard emergency preparedness curricula, public health education, or school instruction. The honest answer involves a few converging factors that played out over the 20th century. The arrival of municipal water infrastructure, grid electricity, and mass-produced housing made these methods seem unnecessary at first and then backward. Knowledge that is not actively practiced and transmitted stops being transmitted within a generation or two. Building codes, introduced largely for legitimate safety reasons, also standardized construction in ways that priced out owner-built shelter. Technical knowledge that was once passed from parents to children through doing became, quietly and without announcement, knowledge that no longer transferred. The result is that most people today have no practical experience with water collection, passive cooling, or weatherproof shelter design, not because that knowledge is complex or inaccessible, but because there was no longer a context in which it was learned. It faded the way most practical skills fade, not through active suppression, but through disuse. What replaced it was a set of commercial systems, utility infrastructure, manufactured housing, and water treatment facilities that genuinely improved on the older methods in many ways, but that also created a near total dependency on their continued functioning and continued affordability. When that affordability broke down for large numbers of people over the last several decades, the gap became visible. And the response, culturally, was largely to treat that gap as a personal failure rather than a knowledge failure. Marcus's situation was not a failure of any kind. It was a demonstration of what remains possible when someone takes the underlying physics seriously. Here is the practical summary for anyone who wants to work with these principles directly. Start with a reversible tarp, silver on one side and blue or green on the other, available at discount stores and hardware, closeout bins for $2 to $5 in the 6x8 or 8x10 foot range. That single object is the foundation of every system described here. For shelter, pitch in the plow point configuration, ridgeline at 5 feet between 2 anchor points, peak centered, front corners staked wide at least 8 feet out for a slope past 30 degrees, rear edge raised 4 to 6 inches on each side with sticks for continuous airflow, overhand drip line knots at each stake corner, silver side facing up. If you have a second tarp or an emergency mylar blanket, suspend it 12 inches above the first. That gap becomes your cooling system. If you cannot build the complete structure, the minimum adjustment with the highest impact is this: never pitch a tarp flat or with a shallow slope. Steep pitch, raised sides, elevated ground. That one change eliminates the majority of shelter failures that people attribute to the tarp itself. For water, position a clean container under your lowest corner before any rain event. After collection, pre-filter through cloth if visibly cloudy, then SODIS in clear PET bottles for 6 hours of full direct sun. No equipment required beyond what is already part of the shelter system. Marcus was not doing something primitive, he was doing something precise. He was reading a set of physical systems, heat transfer, fluid dynamics, UV radiation, soil thermodynamics, and working with them rather than purchasing a substitute for understanding them. The knowledge required to do what he did is not lost. It was never erased. It simply stopped being the kind of thing people practiced, and so it stopped being the kind of thing people knew. That is reversible. The physics has not changed, the techniques have not stopped working, and the gap between what these methods can provide and what most people believe is possible outside of a commercial system is wider than almost anyone expects until they see the numbers laid out plainly. That gap is worth closing, and this is one place where the closing happens.